Hey everybody, BigBlackHatMan here, and today I seem to have nobody disturbing me, nobody's taking over my show. I can finally talk about what I've been meaning to talk about for the last 2 weeks. Haha! This, as you can see, is Deadwood. This is the entire series, and I want to talk about this today. So, after the credits, here we go. So I'm going to do this vlog style. I thought about doing a more proper review and scripting something out, but it's just not my style. It's not what I do. I just want to talk about Deadwood, and this is a really good series. I've really enjoyed this series. This is the series I think everybody's been telling me I should see since I first showed up as the Western guy, because they're like, this is the Western series, you have to see this series. And so I've been meaning to, and I finally got a chance to watch it. Really enjoyed it. Found the whole set for pretty cheap on Blu-ray, and picked it up and watched it all. And I enjoyed it. I'm going to tell you, I'm very honest with you, I mean, it's almost a decade old now, but it's a really solid series. It's got good characters. Alice Swearingen, played by Ian McShane, is one of the most interesting protagonists and antagonists. He flips-flops back and forth so often in the series. Then you have Tim Oliphant as Seth Bullock, and he's just... The only thing I don't like about him is he's only got 2 emotions. He's either angry or he's uncomfortable. That's all Seth Bullock does, but he does it really, really well. So it works in this series. And then, of course, there's a huge supporting cast that really makes the series work. And I really dig Deadwood. I really enjoyed this series. Critique-wise, it's got its flaws. I can go through each episode and say, hey, this wasn't good or that wasn't good. You know, that was a bad story point. This was a bad story point. This person didn't act quite as well as they should have. But I don't really want to do that. Instead, what I'm going to talk about is why this isn't a true Western series. And holy cow, but that sounds confusing. But I've watched a lot of Western TV and movies, obviously. There's something very out of genre about this series, and I've been thinking about what it is, and it comes down to a few things. And one of the first big things that hits you is the language. Not just the profanity, because they do cuss an unbelievable amount in this show. I mean, they drop F-bombs left and right, here and there, and they just dig it. I mean, that's what they do. And that cussing is anachronistic. It's not the kind of profanity you would have heard in the 19th century, because the big F-bomb, which I don't cuss on my show, I would say it normally, but I'm not going to say it here. It wasn't really popular until World War II, so it would have been used in this context. They use another number of anachronistic words. But it's not just those words that they're using. It's also the way they speak. They talk in this very rhythmic way, and it feels unnatural at times, honestly, and it feels much more modern. They tried to rip some of the 19th century logical arguments you would read in papers out and put it in people's mouths, which is really awkward at times. It's really neat sometimes to hear some of the characters recite it well, but every once in a while I get one actor who just really stumbles on that stuff. But the language and the way people talk don't feel like 19th century language, and most Westerns are done in a very 19th century language style. This one is not, and so it gives us this strange, much more modern feel and non-Western feel right off the bat. Another thing about this series is it almost all takes place in the town of Deadwood, which makes sense. It's called Deadwood, and that's where you think it would take place. But it's a very cramped environment. It's very crowded, very much people on top of one another. And the vast majority of Westerns I've ever seen in my life have an open feeling to them, right? They're much more, they use a bigger shot, and you'll have a character surrounded by lots of... This series has a ton of really tight close-ups, very noirish, very TV. Other Western series that I enjoy, let's say Have Gun Will Travel, I'm trying to think. I'm blanking now. Of course, when I need it, I'm blanking. Well, even Briscoe County Jr., which I was talking about last night with a friend, they definitely do this. They pull the shots back. You can see a lot more. Okay, here's a good example. Firefly. Firefly is a sci-fi TV series, but it's also a Western and it takes place on a spaceship, so you think it'd be very cramped because it's on a spaceship. But you still get these big, wide-ranging shots when they go down on planets, and even in the ship, there's a lot of pullbacks where they're making space and making everything seem really open. And Deadwood almost goes out of its way to seem claustrophobic, which works for the tone. And that's one more thing I want to get to, is the tone of this series. It's very modern in its sensibility. It's not a true Western genre thing. It doesn't really go into the tropes and the typical things. It doesn't feel like it draws from Westerns as influence. It feels more like it draws from gangster and cop shows. I mean, David Milch, the creator, of course, he was famous for NYPD Blue, and this tonally feels much like NYPD Blue did. I haven't watched a ton of that series. I've watched a little bit here and there, and this is the same in so many ways. And so Deadwood is classified as Western genre because it takes place in 1876 Deadwood, which is one of the major Western towns, and it has real-life Western characters like Al Swearingen and Seth Bullock and Wild Bill Hickok and George Hurst. But this is the least Western series I've ever watched that's supposed to be a Western. And that seems weird because I'm going to say Firefly, which is a sci-fi in the future, is more Western than this. And Briscoe County Jr., which has these strange sci-fi elements that get inserted in, it's more Western than this. This does not draw on Western tropes, and so it feels not Western. And I'd love for someone to debate me on this point, because I got the feeling the whole time watching this series. Now, you notice when I started off, I said this was a really good series. And I stand by that. Despite the fact that it breaks these rules of the Western genre, it is really excellent. It builds great characters and gives them nice little storylines to walk through. They're not all perfect, and there's flaws in some of the characters. I admit I didn't care for Joni Mitchell. Or Joni Stubbs. I said her name wrong then. I won't start over them, but it's a vlog, right? You just keep going. Even when you screw up and say the wrong name. I don't know why I was thinking Mitchell. It's Joni Stubbs. But I do like the series. But I can see why people who aren't big Western fans like this series, and those are the reasons why, because it's not terribly Western. If you like something like, say, The Sopranos or Boardwalk Empire, this has got much the same feel as those, much more so than it does true Western genre feel. And so I think that raises the question, lastly here, is it okay to break with the norm of the Western genre? And I'm going to say yes, because this turned out really well, right? Deadwood is an excellent series. As long as you're going to do something that's good. If you're going to do crap and then don't fall back on the tropes and the tone of the Western genre, then I think you're going to just be making crap, and it's not going to appeal to even the fan base who might have got on with you otherwise, or anybody who doesn't like crap. So I appreciate what David Milch did in some ways in the series. He does insert some history into his fiction, because this is fiction, pure fiction. You know, I mean, they use real characters and they use some real events, but it's, for the most part, this is very fictional. I mean, right off the bat, one fact that is completely wrong in this series. In the series, Seth Bullock shows up in 1876. Factually correct. Seth Bullock arrived in Deadwood, South Dakota in 1876. They have Al Swearingen already there, set up and operating. Not right. Al Swearingen in real life didn't come to Deadwood until 1877 after Seth Bullock. So, like I said, this is fiction. Good fiction, but fiction nonetheless. So, there are my thoughts on Deadwood. I really like the series. I recommend it to anybody who likes this sort of hard-boiled crime series. That's what this is, a hard-boiled crime series, much more than it is gangster sort of TV series, than it is an actual Western genre thing. And so maybe if you don't like the Western genre, but you like those things, this might actually be exactly the series for you. And lastly, I want to say this. This series ended after 3 years. It was canceled because of budget cuts and things like that, and HBO just didn't want to spend the money on it. And it doesn't have a proper finale. I'm going to say that I don't mind that so much. Some people have told me that that really bothers them. But it's sort of a slice of life character piece more than it is anything that's narrative driven. So I don't really feel hurt. At some point it was going to end, and there was going to be loose ends, because you just can't help it in a series like this. And this series gets so much going sometimes. They even forget their own story arcs. There's one from the first season with E.B. Farnham, who's one of my favorite characters. And he betrays Al, and Al sort of lets it go as long as he's going to keep track of these other people that he helped to betray him to. It's not true betrayal in some ways. And that's just dropped. It's never mentioned again, like after Al forgives him. And you're sort of, and I remember thinking to myself, how come that never came back up? It should have come back up at some point, but it didn't. So the end of Deadwood is perfectly fine the way it is. And so there you go. There are my thoughts on Deadwood and a review of something, which I rarely do, but hey, there's one for you. So I guess I'll wrap it up. Happy trails. Watch you some Deadwood. And watch out for those rough patches. Bloopers this week, but see, I shaved last week for that wedding, and now my beard is in recovery, for those who are concerned. Going back to the full beard because it's winter time and I'm working outside and it's cold. See you guys.